for test 3 is ready. They're up there. Somebody did bring it to my attention that I had the wrong video in the test remediation. So I have fixed the video. I know some of y'all don't even fool with Infinite Campus. You just go to my YouTube page. It's right on the YouTube page. I just didn't paste the correct one in Infinite Campus. So test 3 remediation ready to go. All right. We've got a quiz on Tuesday. So that's a week from today. It's going to be the last day of school. I figure that's better than having it when y'all get back, because you're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days without looking at math. So I'd rather y'all take the quiz before you leave. Okie dokie. Questions on that? Okay. All right. Most people that turned in the papers, actually everybody that turned in the papers made a 100. So good job to you guys. Okay, so let me show you how this all works here. We are squaring a binomial, so we are basically multiplying this binomial times itself. So that's a 2 by 2 box. I'm going to have 2x squared and 5y across the top. I'm going to have 2x squared and 5y down the side. Multiply coefficients, add powers. So I have 4x to the 4th here. Here I have 10x squared y. Here I have 10x squared y. And here I have 25y squared. I can combine these boxes because they both have x squared y. When I combine, I get a positive 20x squared y. Tack on the 25y squared. Tack on the 4x to the 4th. Question there? Okay. Factoring a trinomial. Need a 2 by 2 box. First term goes in the first slot. Last term goes in the last slot. We multiply and get a 20. Middle term goes in the bottom. This is why this one is different. When we multiply, normally we just have an x squared that breaks down into x and x. Well, now when we multiply, we also have a y squared, so I have to break the y squared down and put y's in the boxes. That's how this one is different, just slightly more challenging, okay? Magic numbers. What are the magic numbers? 5 and 4. When I multiply those numbers, I get 20. When I add them, I get 9. Okay? Now I'm doing greatest common factor. Greatest common factor here is 2x. Greatest common factor here is 5y. Greatest common factor here is x. Greatest common factor here is 2y. So my factored form has 2x and 5y together and x and 2y together. My magic numbers are both positive, so I need plus signs. Only one of the factors is in the multiple choice. It's the 2x plus 5y. Question there? All right. This little fella here, what we are working towards is being able to find the area of a composite figure. Composite figure is one that's not just a rectangle, it's not just a triangle, it's kind of more than one. And before we can do that, we've got to be able to find missing parts. So I figured yesterday and today we'd work on finding the missing parts. So these two lines come together and they're the same size as this big line. So if you can imagine taking this line and shifting it up, take this line and move it up to here, notice these would be the same line. So when I move this line up, the dotted part is 2x plus 10. So how do I get these two lines to match? Well, y'all, you can actually do a subtraction. What is 3x minus 2x? It's 1x. So that's what I need over here. 10 minus 10 is 0. So y'all, now if I combine these two together, they equal that one. So FE has an expression of just x. Now, if you wrote x plus 0, that's fine. If you wrote 1x plus 0, that's fine, but it's an x. That's what's missing. Okay? Okay, now, this line here is these two lines put together. So if you can imagine moving this line to here, notice these lines will match. So I'm going to move this line to there, so the dotted area is 2x plus 5. So now these two have to equal this. Well, y'all, I can subtract. What's 5x minus 2x? 3x. What is 12 minus 5? So this unknown side has an expression of 3x plus 7. Question there? Easy stuff? Okay. 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 So yesterday we learned difference of two squares as a factoring method. Okay. Basically I left the 2 out. Okay. But difference of two squares, if you shorten it, is called dots. Difference of two squares. The setup for this is 2 parentheses. One sign has a plus in one parenthesis has a plus in it, the other one has a minus. Okay? You must have a difference in order to use this method. In other words, it must be a minus sign. You must have 2 terms to do this method. In other words, if it's 3 terms, it doesn't work. And each one of those terms has to be a perfect square. So all of that has to take place before you can use this factoring method, okay? So, difference of squares. Basically, the front term is going to be broken down into the same factors, not different factors. So, what 2 numbers that are the same multiply together to give me 25? It's 5 times 5. So, y'all, what you do is, you've got 2 parentheses. 5 goes in the beginning of each parenthesis because this is the first term. It goes in the first slots of each parenthesis. Okay? One sign is plus, one sign is minus. It doesn't matter. You make it minus plus. Plus minus doesn't matter. Okay? The last term breaks down into the last slots. So 36 breaks down into 6 times 6. It's got to be the factors that match. And then the way you do the powers, y'all, is you divide the power by 2. Okay? So this is a power of 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So I'm going to have 6x in my last slots. And that's how you factor a difference of 2 squares. Question on that? Okay, so there's 2 sections. For some reason they call this section level 2, and I think the reason why they call it level 2 is because you've got more variables in it. Okay, so I've got you an example for level 2. Oh, also, I know what I wanted to tell y'all. If you struggle with finding what these perfect square factors are, folks, you can take the square root and it will tell you what that number is. So the square root button is right here. So if you press the yellow button and the square root button and you type your number in, it will give you that root, 5. Okay? All right. So, how does my 1 break down? 1 times 1. So, 1s go in the front slots. I need 1 sign plus and 1 sign minus. How does the last term break down? xy times xy. That goes in the back of each parenthesis. Easy factoring method. Easy factoring method. We good? Okay. Okay. Last factoring method is factoring by grouping, and we did some yesterday. I just want to do some more. Once we do that, y'all, we got to put it all together. So that's kind of where we're headed. Once we do this last factoring method, you've got to be able to look at a problem and go, which method do I use? Then we do something called factor completely. So this is your last method, and then, we're going to kind of put it all together. Okay, so I'm going to give you a problem we did yesterday on the whiteboards. So go ahead and write this down and do it with me. Okay, so first of all, for grouping, we have 4 terms. 1, 2, 3, 4, separated by plus and minus signs. Terms are separated by plus and minus signs. Okay, what we do is we group 2 terms together. Y'all, it's really nice when the terms are already grouped accordingly to help you out. Sometimes they are not. So for the first few, they're grouped to where they're going to work out. So if you remember, the way we did this was we grouped 2 and 2. And what method do we use? Who remembers the method we use? Greatest common factor. So what is the greatest common factor between these 2 terms? 5 what? 5 n to the second. Okay, so with greatest common factor method, I put my greatest common factor out here and set up 1 parenthesis. And now to determine what goes in the parentheses, I divide by my greatest common factor. So when I divide here, what do I get? I subtract powers. I just get an n. What do I get when I divide here? 10 divided by 5 is 2. N squared's canceled. Okay, now I'm done with that. I'm going to come over here. What's my greatest common factor between these 2 terms? And it's a plus 3. Set up a parenthesis and divide each term by my greatest common factor. So what do I get here when I divide? Just an n, yeah. And how about here? Plus 2. So y'all notice, I have to come out with a common factor here. If I don't, then these terms have to be rearranged. So I have to come out with a common factor. So now that I have a common factor, I pull that out, and then what's on the outside is my other factor. So that's what we were doing yesterday. Okay, so now I want you guys to try one. Yes. All right, you guys try that one. Okay. So when I went around, most people can get the first part, but they're kind of slow to do the final part. Greatest common factor between these 2 terms is 2x squared. So I divide by 2x squared. Here I end up with an x. Here I end up with a plus 6. Okay, here my greatest common factor is a 5. So when I divide by 5, I get an x plus 6. Okay, now I'm going to show you something in a different way, folks. I'm going to factor again by the greatest common factor method. So if you remember, we pull our common factor out and we set up a parenthesis. So y'all, if you check on this, remember, if we're doing greatest common factor method, we divide by the common factor that we pulled out. So y'all, look what happens. I have 2x squared plus 5. That's how I'm getting that second parenthesis. Now, some of y'all just know that comes out as one factor and what's left over is the other. But I'm just showing you mathematically, it's just the greatest common factor method again, a second time. Y'all good? Okay. Now, folks, we've got a minus sign here. So the best thing for you to do is when you pull your greatest common factor out here, you want to pull the minus sign out with it. I'm going to give you that hint. Let's see how you do. All you're doing is factoring by the greatest common factor here. Pull out your greatest common factor, set up a parenthesis. Waiting. All right, folks, I think some of us are a little not remembering how to factor by greatest common factor. Y'all, the greatest common factor between these two terms is 5x squared. When we factor by greatest common factor, we set up one parenthesis. I'm going to divide my terms by my greatest common factor. Here I subtract power, so I have an x, and then 15 divided by 5 is 3, so I have a 3x. Okay, here 40 divided by 5 is a positive 8, and x is canceled. So I'm done there. Now I'm going to come over here. 2 is my greatest common factor, but I'm going to pull the minus sign out. So now I'm going to divide by negative 2. Now watch how this works. Negative divided by negative, that's a positive 3x. Negative divided by negative is a positive 8. So notice by pulling out the minus, y'all, my parentheses come out to be the same. I got to have this the same. That is a common factor. So now I pull that out. And then my other factor is 5x squared minus 2. Did y'all have minus 2? Did you have minus 2? Minus 2. Okay. All right. Let's try that one. What's my greatest common factor here? 1 what? Okay, so you should have pulled an x squared out from this one. What's my greatest common factor here? What's my greatest common factor for these guys? And go ahead and pull that minus out. So there you go. Got you started. Okay, so I need to divide by my greatest common factor. So when I do it here, I end up with 6x. Here I end up with a plus 1. Okay, here I need to divide by my greatest common factor. Negative divided by negative, that would be a positive 6x. Negative divided by negative would be a positive 1. Notice these parentheses are the same. Y'all, the grouping method doesn't work if these don't come out the same. So they're the same, so that's one of my factors, and then my other factor is what's outside, x squared minus 7. Okay? All right? Okay? In this second one, you're going to need to pull the negative out with it, folks. You're going to have to pull the negative out with it. And you'll see it'll work out if you'll pull the negative out with it. Okay, what's my greatest common factor in these first two? X squared. So now when I divide by that, I subtract powers and I get an x. That cancels, I get a minus 1. Question on that first part. Okay, here, what's my greatest common factor? 5. Y'all, I need to pull the minus sign out. Watch what happens when I divide by a negative. This is why I got to pull the minus sign out. Do y'all see how this has a positive x? See how this is going to have to be positive. What's negative divided by negative? That's why I pulled the minus out. And y'all, the second part works out. Notice this turned out to be minus. We'll check this out. What's a positive divided by a negative? So see, that's why you pull that minus sign out, so that these end up having the correct signs. So now one of my factors is x minus 1. That's my factor in common. And then x squared minus 5 is my other factor. Okay. Now I'm going to step this up a notch. Okay. Y'all, this will not come out right if we factor this. It needs to be regrouped. In other words, this is not going to work out. Do I have a common factor with those two? There's nothing. There's no variables in common. There's nothing other than a 1. So y'all, I need to regroup these. What does regroup mean? Well, y'all, all it means is maybe instead of these two going first and these two going last, maybe you pick these two to go first and these two to go last. Or maybe you pick, let's see, did I say these two and these two? Maybe you pick these two and these two. But you're going to have to regroup them. So I'm going to let you guys regroup. And by the way, they can be regrouped 2 different ways and still work out. So I want you to regroup them. In other words, instead of having these two together, I want you to group this with something else. And group this with something else. So rewrite it. Regrouping them together. Okay, so I can do this both ways. what did y'all put with the x cubed? Did anybody put 5x squared with it? Okay, I'm going to do it that way first. Now, y'all, if you do this, this is my recommendation. Do you see how these powers go down? Do you see how these powers go down? Y'all, then what you want to do is line up these other two where the powers go down. You see, highest power to lowest, highest power to lowest. Okay, so now, x squared is my common factor here with these first two, and I'm left with x plus 5. Okay, here, negative 2 comes out, and I'm left with x plus 5. So x plus 5 is one of my factors, and x squared minus 2 is the other one. Okay? Okay, now, did anybody put x cubed with, like, the 2x? You did? Okay. So if we put x cubed with the 2x, then let's make these powers go down as well. Let's put the 5x squared next, minus 10. Notice, my powers go down, my powers go down. So now, if I pull out an x, I'm left with x squared minus 2. Here, if I pull out a negative 5, I'm left with x squared minus 2. So notice these match. So x squared minus 2 is one of my parentheses, x minus 5 is the other one. Okay? Folks, let me get your attention. Okay, y'all, what I've done is I've rearranged these in two different ways. Notice that when I rearranged here, high power, low power. High power, low power. Okay? So greatest common factor here is x squared. I set up a parenthesis, and I'll end up with x plus 3. Greatest common factor here is 6, but I'm going to pull the minus sign out. Here I'll get an x, and here I'll get a plus 3. It worked because now I have the same thing in the parenthesis, and then my other factor is x squared minus 6. Okay, now I'm going to do it this way. Notice, high power, low power, high power, low power. Here, x is my common factor. I'm left with an x squared minus 6. Here, 3 is my common factor. That leaves me with an x squared minus 6. Same thing in the parentheses, so x squared minus 6 is one of my factors, x plus 3 is the other. Y'all good? Okay.